Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.
The Church of Christ in Canada welcomes you to Key to the Kingdom. Today's lesson is entitled Israel's First King.
Welcome again as we continue our look at the unfolding plan of God. We're just about ready to finish our studies from the Old Testament for a while. We're going to look at the culmination of the plan of God. We could spend days and weeks talking about all of the Old Testament. If we went into detail on the kings, for example, we could spend a lot of time there. If we talked about the prophets, we could spend a lot of time there. We will refer back to those, but we want to get into the actual fulfillment of the plan of God, and we're at that point where we can do that. But we do want to spend a little bit of time today talking about the kings. You know, following the period of the judges, God allowed Israel to have what they wanted. They wanted a king. Israel thought that an earthly king would be a step forward. Now, we suggested last time in our lesson that the idea was that God was the ruler, that God was the king, and that His will would reign. And certainly He gave the people of Israel every reason to do what He asked them to do, because, you know, He cared for them so wonderfully and delivered them in the conquest they had, and from Egypt and all that went on. He was there. But they thought it'd be nice to have a king like everybody else. I think it's true to man's nature, isn't it? Doesn't man think he knows better? Certainly, you know, we know better than the politicians, don't we? You know, is there anyone among us who doesn't at times complain about our politicians and decisions they have made? You know, sometimes we look at what they do and say, my goodness, how in the world could they have been so short-sighted to make such a decision as that? We know what's best. But if we're really wise, we understand that we don't always know what's best. And that's why we consult with other people. That's why we learn from others. That's why we learn from history, for example. To recognize that certain behaviors lead to certain ends. We understand that there are those who know better than we do about health issues, for example. This has been, for me, one of those years where I've really had to come face to face with the fact that what I thought was best for me wasn't always best for me physically. I needed to make changes in my lifestyle. I needed to take more seriously some things than I had in the past. And so, you know, we don't know. And certainly in this case, it was not the best decision that Israel would make. But our free will, God created us free so that we could make choices, and that permits us to do things that indeed we can look back on and regret. Now, Israel, if you're familiar with the history, Israel had at the beginning a king over a unified nation. And so we have Saul, who was the first king. We have David, the second king. We have Solomon, the third king. Now, each of these men reigned for 40 years. So for 120 years, we have this united nation with a central head on earth in the sense of the king. God was still in charge, even if they didn't want to always listen to him. But when it came to, running the day-to-day affairs, you have these kings, 3 of them. Now, these kings were different from each other, Each had his own strengths and his own weaknesses. All 3 of them showed wisdom at times and folly at times. Each of them showed commitment to God's will to the point that they would walk and do the things that He said for them to do, and times when they chose not to. Now, let me just take a minute to mention that this period of the kings lasts for about 465 years. And these first 120 had the united kingdom. Well, then after that, we have the kingdom divided between Rehoboam and Jeroboam, who became rulers after the death of Solomon. And as a result of that, the kingdom was divided. And we had the 10 tribes in the north who became known as Judah. And we had the 2 tribes, basically 2.5 tribes in the south, who had possession of Jerusalem, for example, and the temple and all that. They were the ones who were called Judah. That as the history unfolds, after a while, Judah is taken into captivity. The northern tribes is taken into captivity, and the southern tribes are not until later on, and that's Judah in the south, Israel to the north. Okay, now at the point we're looking today, let's talk a little bit about this first king. The choice of and the anointing of Saul. Saul was a young Benjaminite. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. It's interesting in a sense to me that God chose a king, first of all, from the Benjaminites. They had been a bit of a problem at one point in history, and had lived in rebellion during the times of the judges and so forth. But at any rate, that's who God chose, and I'm sure that it was the best choice for him to make. Now, this young man, Saul, he was out in the wilderness or out in the countryside or whatever, looking for his father's donkeys. These donkeys were lost, and they were out looking for them, and in fact couldn't find them, and in fact found themselves perhaps lost later on. And so Saul knows about a prophet who is supposed to be in the area, and that's the man we talked about last week, Joshua. He knew about Joshua and Samuel. Joshua was the leader of the people earlier on. Thinking about Samuel, okay, the last of the judges and a prophet. Now he knew about Samuel and went to look for him. Now it's interesting because God had informed Samuel that he would soon meet the person that would be the first king. Now, if you read the entire account from 1 Samuel, you'll find that the people came to him. They were complaining and wanted a king. And Samuel took it very personally. He took it as though the people were rejecting him as a leader. That he was the one that was being rejected. Well, God straightened that out by letting him know that no, that's not the case. They're rejecting me. Okay? And that's even more important, Samuel, than rejecting you. Okay? They're rejecting me. But that's okay, because we're going to let them have their way. He says now that he's going to meet this new guy pretty soon, the guy who he's going to anoint. If you go over to 1 Samuel chapter 9, notice in, let me see. In the text, he's talking about Saul looking after and looking for his father's donkeys. And so let's begin reading at verse 7. Saul said to his servant, "If we go, what can we give the man?" He's talking about the prophet. "The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" And the servant answered him again. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so that he will tell us what way to take. Formerly in Israel, if a man went to inquire of God, he would say, 'Come, let us go to the seer,' because the prophet of today used to be called a seer." "Good," Saul said to his servant, "come, let's go." So they set out for the town where the man of God was. As they were going up the hill to the town, they met some girls coming out to draw water, and they asked them, "Is the seer here?" "He is," they answered. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice afterward. Those who are invited will eat. Go up now. You shall find him about this time." So they went to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. "About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him leader over my people Israel. He will deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked upon my people, for their cry has reached me." So, here we have this promise that had been made by God to Samuel, that about this time tomorrow, you're going to see the guy that you're going to appoint the first king. Go back to the reading at verse 17. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." And so here we have this appointment made by God, and he meets Saul. Now it's interesting, if you look at the life of Saul, as I said earlier, all three of these first kings had their good days and bad days, and certainly that was true of Saul. Saul was a guy who sometimes took responsibility upon himself that he didn't have the right to take, and he was a guy, unfortunately, who could hold a grudge for a long time. And yet, it's interesting reading about him in the first encounter we have here in 1 Samuel 9. Let's go back and start reading at verse 18. And hear the description that we have and the events that transpire right here. Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, "Would you please tell me where the seer's house is?" "I am the seer," Samuel replied. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me. And in the morning I will let you go and will tell you all that is in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and all your father's family?" Now, here, it's kind of coded language almost. First of all, remember they were going to find the seer because they want to find out where the donkeys are. The seer said, "Don't worry about that. The donkeys have been found. Everything's fine there. You're going to go up here to the high place and eat with me. And as a matter of fact, you are going to be, it's going to be important because it is you to whom all Israel will turn." Okay? "And to your father's family." Now, the reaction of Saul is an encouraging one. Saul answered, "But I am not a Benjaminite from the smallest tribe of Israel. And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me?" Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. Samuel said to the cook, "Bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside." So the king took up the leg with what was on it and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, "Here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you for this occasion from the time I said, 'I have invited guests.'" And Saul dined with Samuel that day. After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, "Get ready, and I will send you on your way." When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of the town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead of us." And the servant did so. "But you stay here a while, so that I may give you a message from God." So, here's this relationship developing. Here's Samuel saying, you're going to be special. You are special. Now I'm going to give you something really special. And when I read the text, I wonder, what was going through Saul's mind? What could he imagine that this man of God wanted of him? In your wildest dreams, what is it he's going to do? Or what is it he's talking about here? He's really got me all confused. Well, in the 10th chapter, verse 1, "Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, 'Has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance? When you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb on the border of Benjamin. They will say to you, "The donkeys you set out to look for have been found, and now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. He is asking, 'What shall I do about my son?' Then you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a skin of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. After that, you will go to Gibeath of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place with lyres, tambourines, flutes, and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come upon you in power, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. So here, he's told this something special is going to happen. You're going to meet these people, and you're going to prophesy. And it's going to be a special deal. Well, this was the beginning. This was the beginning. Saul is going to be this king. And as I said, he did a fair job in many of the things that he did. He served well, but not always so well. For example, in 1 Samuel 13, we read about his making an unlawful sacrifice. He wasn't allowed to do that. That was something for the priest to do, and was found condemned for that, or at least chastised for that. Certainly in 1 Samuel 15, when he was supposed to have taken on the Amalekites and destroyed them and didn't, there we're told that he lost his kingship and he would not be king very much longer. Well, it was at that point in chapter 16 that the second king is anointed, who was David, and he would be the next king. For the 13 chapters that follow, the story of that is Saul's bitter animosity against David is talked about. In fact, at times he hunted David like he was an animal. And yet David was what Saul had been. Saul had been God's anointed by Samuel, anointed on behalf of God to be the leader of his people. But because of his failures, after 40 years, he was not going to be king anymore. David was going to be king. And as we read in the account and in 1 Samuel, the story of the animosity between the two. Well, actually not so much between the two, because David didn't hate Saul, but he had to dodge him and stay away from it. There's a lot of interesting stories to read in 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles about these three kings and the other kings to follow. Sadly, at the end of a sad life, Saul killed himself by falling on his sword. David, who replaced him, did a credible job of leadership for his 40 years. His greatest disappointment was that he would not be allowed, or was not allowed, because he had been a man of war. He was not allowed to build the temple. But Solomon, who replaced him, would accomplish that work. Yet, as we look at this, there's one thing that comes back to my mind. Saul, David, and Solomon all did reasonably credible jobs as leaders, as kings, but they failed too in different ways. And it reminds us that God had said to Israel, if you have a king, if that's what you want, you're going to suffer for that. You're going to pay for that. Now they did. Particularly, I think, under the reign of Solomon, where Solomon accumulated so many wives, so many stalls of horses and all of that, and was in charge of forced labor, I think. But all in all, these first three kings didn't do too badly. But it was really the beginning of the end as far as the old covenant and the old law. Jesus came to fulfill that law and to bring about the completion of God's plan of redemption. So join us next week as we get into the New Testament and begin to look at the time when this plan of God, which began in the Garden of Eden, came full circle, and the provision for redemption with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords was carried out. May God bless you in your study of His Word. There's a great deal to be learned in our study of the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 11, Moses is giving direction to the people of Israel about preparing to live a godly life. He says in chapter 11, verse 18 beginning, "Fix these words of mine in your hearts and minds. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates, so that your days and the days of your children may be many in the land the Lord has sworn to give your forefathers, as many as the days that the heavens are above the earth." Here, Moses is recognizing the need for the people to open the Word of God, to listen to what God has to say. Not only for them to do it themselves, that is, the adults, but to teach it to their children as well, to help them learn and understand what God's will is. On Key to the Kingdom, our goal is to get you to open the Word of God with us as we study. But more than that, to get you to open the Word on your own, at home, as you open the Word and seek to know God's will. We're happy to provide you free a Bible correspondence course that's based entirely on the Word. Contact us, get this study, and be blessed by it. And may God bless you in your study of His Word.
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.